Well, Irwin, thank you for agreeing to join us and have a conversation looking back on your career, but also looking towards the future and to hear some of your thoughts on what the future may hold for us in the world of science, technology, and the society more generally. When we decided to come to La Jolla, the meetings committee met, and the meetings committee oversees all of the programs that we have here. They said, we're in La Jolla. Usually we're in Philadelphia. We need somebody to introduce us to La Jolla, to San Diego, and who can talk about the transformation of San Diego since the founding of, since the 1960s to the present. And the name that everybody said is, you really have to talk to Irwin Jacobs about that, because he's been a big part of San Diego's life, of its economy, of its culture. And so I really appreciate you joining us and for this conversation and welcoming us to San Diego and La Jolla.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much for coming here.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of interest.
No, it's fantastic. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow, but we have over 250 people registered and really showing that the APS is the American Philosophical Society. We are a national, international body. So, Irwin, I want to start by talking a little bit about your career and how you landed here in San Diego, because you were born and raised in southeastern Massachusetts, just a few miles from where I grew up, went to Cornell, and then you got a PhD in electrical engineering and became a tenured professor at MIT. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm a historian, so I don't know your field, but to be a tenured professor in engineering at MIT is probably the pinnacle or near to it. And so in 1966, with tenure, you decided to leave it all, head across the country, and come to this new startup, the University of California, San Diego. So what were you thinking?
Well, all these decisions happen, and there are a lot of different factors that come into them. You need to have your family in agreement, et cetera. And this was a decision to leave Boston and come to San Diego was a difficult one. In fact, after receiving the invitation to come out for an interview and look into helping start engineering, although it wasn't called engineering at the time, here at a brand new university was very attractive, but went home, discussed it, unfortunately decided not to come because family, friends, everything was on the East Coast, career. And we had visited California in 64, 65 academic year from MIT and had loved it out here, so we knew we would want to retire at some point here. And Carl turned it down. Second day after turning it down, we were kind of unhappy with the decision. Major rainstorm in the Boston area, took the subway to Harvard Square and then had to get on a bus to Arlington where we lived and got soaking wet, of course, on the way. Joan, my wife, met me at the door and she said, listen to this. We had been looking to buy a home around Boston. And she read the description of a lovely sounding contemporary home. So I said, great, let's go see it tomorrow morning. And she said, only one trouble, it's in La Jolla. It doesn't take much to flip when you have a decision, both possibly sound good. Anyway, that did flip us. We called and said, if it's still open, we're coming. We had an old van that we'd driven cross-country twice. We did it one more time with a family of 4 at that point and moved here to La Jolla.
Well, that's great. I'll share you my story. My first time in La Jolla, which is 60 years after that. It was with the APS, and I went for a run in downtown La Jolla, and I said, wow, this is spectacular. I think maybe this is where my wife and I can retire. So I got back to the hotel room. I got on Zillow and realized maybe we'll spend a week there when we retire. Because it's changed a lot in those 60 years. Now, so you arrive at a relatively new university, and Dick Atkinson is with us. But you're only there for a brief amount of time, because you then found a company called Linkabit. And a lot of people know about Qualcomm, but your first company was really Linkabit. And can you tell us a little bit about what that company is and what inspired you to leave academy and go into private business?
Yeah, another one of these happy accidents. While at MIT, I had co-authored a textbook on digital communications, the very first such textbook. And so when I moved out here, there were all these requests for consulting. And usually you'll consult a day a week at most. And so I was up at NASA Ames and flying back down to LA actually, with a couple of friends from UCLA. And I mentioned I had all these requests for consulting. And they said, oh, why don't we start a company and share the consulting? And so that's how Linkabit started. I said, that would be fine as long as I don't have to manage it. Any case, it started and slowly grew. And we began to add some people, including some students that had come out with me to from MIT to finish their PhD. And I finally decided I better take a year's leave and get it organized. So I did that in 72 academic year. And then at the end of that year, had to decide whether to go back to the teaching or to stay with the company. And it was a hard debate, but I had been teaching students for 13 years. Was the way I made that decision.
And here we are at the American Philosophical Society for promoting useful knowledge. And Linkabit is successful, and as I understand, you sell it in the late 70s, early 80s. And you could retire, but you decide to found another company called Qualcomm. Qualcomm now is one of the largest, if not largest, private employer in San Diego. It has a market capitalization of almost $200 billion. When you founded it, what was your wildest dream for what would happen with it?
Well, making the decision not to go back to teaching and start another company was kind of due to a few other employees from Linkabit that said, let's try to do it again. And Linkabit had grown 50, 60% a year. So I did decide to go ahead and, with this other group, start a new company. But I told my wife, Joan, that, at best we'll reach 100 employees. Well, it's over 50,000 now, so that wasn't a good estimate. But it was interesting. Actually, both companies, we started them without a business plan, without a product in mind, and just thinking that digital and wireless would probably be an interesting future. And of course, it turned out that way.
Yeah. So you began as a scientist, as a professor, but you became an executive and a leader of a company that grew dramatically, tens of thousands of employees. Was there anything that you took from your academic training that was useful as an executive?
A lot. People always ask, what's the difference between your academic life and your business life? And I say, well, part of it's very similar. At the university, particularly with graduate students, student working on a research project comes, talks with you, you discuss it, give them perhaps a little direction, and off they go. At a business, an employee, you give them an idea for a project or a group. They go off work, come back, you consult some more, and off they go. So in a sense, there's that interesting interaction between yourself and others about technical subjects. But that's only about half the time, because you have this other half where you have to worry about business and finances, meeting payroll, going out, finding customers, etc. Well, at the university, you also spend a lot of time in committees. And so I often point out that the advantage of business over the university in that sphere is you can make a decision.
So if you have any lessons for academics today, maybe they're a professor thinking about how their work could be useful to the world with business and the like, what advice would you give them?
Well, be willing to take some chances, but be also willing to make changes. So someone might have an idea for by the way, you can still hear my Boston accent, might have an idea for a product that they want to work on, and that would be somewhat innovative, and so they'll go in that direction. And I always point out that it's never going to go in a straight line, that it's going to jig and jag, or I often say dynamically program. So you're at some state, don't worry about how you got to that point, you're already there, but where should you best go from there? And so be prepared for that. The other aspect is innovation, and if you're doing something, I always advise, don't do something that's just a small change, but look for something that if you are successful would be a significant change. But then you're going to thread in a bunch of other people that are in the business. And so be prepared for lots of people saying that that's not going to work, that doesn't make sense, you're too late, etc. A lot of arrows in the back. But just proceed ahead. The best way to deal with that is to show that your idea is good. I often say that while you're going through different decision points, that you always wake up at 4 a.m., the brain's had a chance while you're sleeping to work on the problem, and you wake up, you think about the different issues. If you can fall back asleep, keep going.
That's right. So you mentioned being from southeastern New England, the Boston area, and your first company was actually founded there, if I remember correctly, when you were a young boy during World War II. Do you want to share that story with us?
It wasn't quite a company, but we were renting a two-story home that had just converted from coal to oil for heating. And so there was a coal bin, so I set up a photo studio, because that was when you developed film and you printed it. I mean, it was great fun, actually. And it turned out that it was also toward the end of World War II, and there was a person near me that had set up a shop at his home. He had to close his store, and he then hired me, more or less, to develop and print the pictures that the customers would bring in, which turned out to be a serious responsibility, because all we had to work with were war surplus chemicals and paper. And sometimes they did what they should do, but sometimes they didn't. So that was fun. There was another project when a school class would go from New Bedford to Boston on a field trip, and I'd take lots of pictures with a little box camera, and then print up some and be able to sell those to other students.
So you've been an entrepreneur for a very long time. So I want to talk about your experience in San Diego and the change that has happened to the city in the 60 years that you've been here. A lot of people hold San Diego as an example of the knowledge-based economy, shifting from a small city that was focused on fishing and agriculture and other industries to now one that has a vibrant university, research alongside private industry together. So can you just share with us your observations on the connections between universities, research institutions, and the economy and health of cities?
Yeah. Well, when we came out, I think San Diego had a very strong military presence, had some industry and defense projects, and mostly retired people, pretty much. And the Salk Institute was here, Scripps Research, and of course the university was very new when we came out. The growth of the university, I think, has been really what's caused major changes here. It was only, when it came, perhaps a few hundred students. Now it's up to 40 some odd thousand. You've probably seen some big towers across the road, student dormitories, a lot of activities going on. But the fact that there were both faculty and now students being trained in very inquisitive questions, some starting companies, I think that just made a huge difference. And so in the case of Linkabit and then Qualcomm, with Linkabit, I think some people have estimated about 100 companies spun out after I left. And with Qualcomm, we've attracted lots of other businesses to come here to be in the wireless area. And so that's built up. And of course, biotech with the university and the hospital and Salk, that whole area has also built up very strongly, again, because of having a major hospital associated with the university. And so it just makes a huge difference to have that kind of intellectual drive, interest, and of course, both students and faculty getting interested in the larger community and accomplishing a lot there.
Yeah, and as Jackie mentioned, you've been very involved philanthropically in supporting a lot of these research institutions. And as you look at the landscape today and all the challenges that research institutions, higher education is facing, particularly with changes in funding, what do you see as the future for research institutions like Salk? How can they navigate these waters? What's the role for philanthropy? What's the role for private industry? And what is the role for the federal government?
Well, I hope the federal government comes back to its senses at some point. Of all the groups to be attacking education and the institutions of higher learning, it's just nonsensical. I mean, there are other nonsensical things too, like climate issues and so on. But that's a particularly bad approach. Yes, you can make up for some of that with philanthropy, and I think that's important. Salk, where I was chairman for a while, a good part of that is supported philanthropically, but also a good part was supported federally. And so now, with the different institutions, including the university, it's slowing down growth. There's been at least one medical building I was familiar with that they had to stop even though there was already a hole in the ground. That interferes with all kinds of progress that could be achieved, and certainly on the health side, improvements. And so philanthropy can obviously play a difference. Corporations have to, by the way, get more involved with philanthropy. There are some that are very actively involved and others. And when I've talked with executives at companies, they often say, well, I've got to, if they're public, I have to worry about my shareholders. And the argument I always used, if a shareholder would approach me, although none ever did actually, because we were always philanthropic at Linkabit and then at Qualcomm, that you have employees that are very valuable. They want to enjoy the community, be proud of the company's role in the community as well. And so any investment that you make philanthropically that pay off with happier employee base, because the most expensive thing would be to lose a valued employee, that really makes sense even for the shareholders. But overall, it's just important for all of us to be seeing what we might be able to do. Unfortunately, of course, we have all kinds of conflicts because right now there's so much pressure on food support, housing, so many problems we have to deal with that the government's backed away from in addition to the universities, that it's hard to think through where best to spend money. So a food bank is obviously very, very important at this point for many, many people.
Yeah. When you were CEO at Qualcomm, you were a scientist, you were an academic, you were a researcher. Corporations like Bell Labs, IBM, RCA, all had these great research divisions. When you were CEO at Qualcomm, how did you think about investing in research, and how do you think corporations more generally themselves could be more active in supporting research?
Well, most corporations, again, you do have to look at where you're going with your business, with your products, and be doing things that are more focused on the next 5 years. Whereas the university research, you really want to have a much broader point of view. But having said that, you can still accomplish quite a bit of research at university. So with Qualcomm, for example, we always had 20% of our revenues going to R&D. There are other very large companies right now, and I won't mention fruit names, but they put in a much lower percentage of their revenue into R&D. And so I think that's important because, again, there's lots to be done. Right now, it's a little bit scary in that we're coming into this new age of artificial intelligence. That requires huge capital investments. And if you make those huge capital investments there, you're still doing some R&D, but much of the funds that are available might be going elsewhere. And so I think that's going to have certainly a long-term payoff. When I say long-term, actually, I used to think with cell phones that they would have a pretty major impact. But in fact, any transition usually takes a decade or so before it sinks in, some of them 2 decades, et cetera, before you find out how to best use them and how it might affect productivity. And I think with AI and AI plus robotics, smart machines, that's going to happen sooner. So I think we have a situation where within the next decade, there's going to be major changes. It, however, also raises then the other problems. I think many employees in a whole variety of different areas are feeling very insecure. You know, is their job going to exist in a year or 2 or 3 years? And how should they prepare for that? And of course, even students at the universities these days, what field should they be going into? With the students, it's easier. Just get a good basic education that you can then apply to almost anything, and that will help. With the insecurity and the workforce impact, we just need to be paying much more attention than has been paid so far to our economy, to our planning, our financial planning. We don't want all the results of this increased productivity only go to the people that own the data centers and the machinery. We want that to get spread much more equally, and the increased productivity should get spread more equally. And so I think we all have a challenge in front of us. I think most likely if things continue in the direction they're going, we'll probably all look forward to a shorter work week. Because again, share the jobs as well as you can. And, but the other aspect, very positive, if you have a shorter work week, you have more time, how should you end up using that time? And so I think that there's going to be not just additional cultural activities around the city, but a lot more emphasis on education in a broad sense, because you want to prepare for all kinds of activities that in the time you'll have in the future.
Well, yes, I was going to end by asking you about your thoughts on AI, because you have lived through so many revolutions, telecommunications, internet revolution. When you think about the future, what do you see in terms of policy, things that we may have to do to address AI, and particularly those that may be displaced and the like by the increased robotics?
Yeah, well, again, combining AI with robots and, of course, drones, some good things, some great things can come out of that. And so I do think our productivity is going to go up. It's going to affect just about every part of our lives, or every different employment. And then, again, the main question is how to make use of that productivity increase. If productivity goes up 5 or 10% over a decade or more, then how should that get divided up? And so providing, obviously, much better financial floors for everybody will be an important aspect. Building up our health systems, and by the way, the AI will help us do that with hopefully lower increasing costs per patient, or not even patient, for helping us be healthy at home. And so there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this, but we're going to have to do some planning on that. And of course, there's going to be, as with any technology, both positive and negative things happening. You can already see that in Ukraine with the drones now getting more artificial intelligence in them and being very destructive. And so we're going to be going through a balancing act going forward. And we just have to, again, have good educational systems, prepare people for a wide variety of future work, and be able to try to think ahead a few years at least and be doing the right thing. How we change our political system to adapt to this is a real problem.
I was going to ask you that, but I think we have some time for some questions. I might ask you one last one, which is, as a historian, I've been worrying about AI. I worry about museums and libraries, which seem to be receiving less support and less visitation. But you just gave me a very hopeful vision of people having more time wanting to visit these places and invest in them. So on the whole, when you think out 10, 15 years, are you hopeful for the future with AI, or are you more worried than hopeful?
I suspect we're going to have a dip or so. It may, with all the money being invested, there may be a hiccup coming along. But overall, I think it's going to end up being, if we treat it properly, a better life for most people.
Great. Thank you. Questions from the audience?
Is there a microphone going around for people's questions? Please state your name and where you're from.
Yep.
Oh, can I go ahead?
Yes.
I just wondered from your I'm Alan Spradling from Carnegie Institution in Baltimore. One of the things that seems like it's changed a lot, and I wonder what your feeling is, if you were starting a company today, there just seems like there's so many more regulations and things that you have to worry about you didn't really have to worry about. I mean, someone might even be upset that you didn't have a business plan, right? Whereas, I don't think that necessarily really the kind of things people do doesn't really add very much to whether they're going to be successful or not. So what do you think about, can you still start this type of company that you've been so successful at today?
It's interesting. With Linkabit, we grew very rapidly, and for the first 9 years, it was almost all government contracts. And at that time, you could send in a proposal with a new idea and get some response back very quickly from the agency. And if you get award, then get some progress payments. And so that was a good way to be able to start companies. With Qualcomm, I thought, well, probably we'll do the same thing. The first several years will be government, but the procurement had changed dramatically. And so more than open to having a new idea and coming back. So the government can play a role in this as well as if we begin to support NIH and others properly. On starting a company, it's a different world, but change opens up all kinds of possibilities. And so each change means that there's something new that could be done, and one should just focus in on that. Be open to it, think about it, talk with people, get a feeling for what might be needed, and then try to run with it.
That's great. What about for philanthropy? Oh, there's a question over there. And I think last question. Oh, and we'll get one more. Oh, there's actually several over there. How much time do we have, Elizabeth? Okay.
I'm Tom Klein. I'm a member's spouse. This is a member over here. You've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and during that time, taxes has gone down significantly. I remember my childhood with my father's taxes. The upper bracket was like 70 or 80%, I think, that he paid, and there was a lot of prosperity. And you mentioned philanthropy, but I didn't hear any mention of taxes. And I'd sort of like to know how a businessman now sees the present tax environment. We have a guy approaching being a trillionaire who owns more than the bottom 50% of his country that's allowed him to make that much money. But it seemed to me, isn't part of the problem we have now isn't related to the whole attitude in this country about taxes, that people making money and doing things say they're destructive. Well, they're not necessarily destructive. They're sort of essential, actually, to maintain a middle class. And I'd just like to hear a few words of what your perspective on taxes are. Thanks.
Well, income inequality, I think, is a very major problem in the country, in the world, a number of countries. And that does affect the way people feel and their ability to, in fact, lead a happy life and think that their children will have a better life than they've had. And so I think that needs to be dealt with. A tax policy is certainly a way to do it. Unfortunately, with taxes, if you have a party that reduces taxes, it's always hard to then go ahead and raise taxes because there's always an objection. Now, if you explain it to the nation that our deficits are getting completely unwieldy, maybe you can get that through, but most politicians don't want to take a chance on a tax increase. What I've been suggesting, since we have a number of very wealthy people, and that wealth is often tied up in their assets of perhaps stock that's become very, very valuable. And rather than cashing in that stock and getting money from the sale of it and paying a tax on that sale, capital gains tax, most people just borrow against that and get a very low interest rate because there's basically no danger whoever's the company lending it to them will meet. And so I've actually suggested that nothing's happened yet, but at least a little discussion, suggested to a few significant politicians. But anyway, setting up a tax on the money borrowed against very valuable assets, rather than giving, by the way, a discount on the interest, put a significant tax. I think that would perhaps be a way with a new tax to get something happening. Of course, value-added taxes are being discussed quite a bit. I prefer to see something a bit more progressive than that, but that's could very well be the next step that's happening here. Raising tax rates on the corporations back up just got lowered. I mean, there's all types of things. It's just political will that's needed, and that political will comes from enough people getting upset and letting their feelings be known. And I think there is a direction, that is slowly happening. The last election, we saw some of that. We'll see where this is all going.
Great. I think we have one more question. No time. Okay. Great. I think we're good. Yeah.